a lot of what's wrong with policing can't be changed by police. It's got to be changed by the rest of us. You know, I mean, there are plenty of things about policing that police can change, right? They can change the training, they can change the recruiting, you know, they can change how officers are evaluated and how shifts are structured and so on. But they can't change stupid laws that over-criminalize and over-penalize trivial infractions. They can't change prosecutors, they can't change judges, they can't change the legislators who we elected who passed the stupid laws. You know, there's a lot of things about policing that is going to take a concerted effort by all of us to change, because unless we do change those things, you can have the best cops in the world and they're working within a system that is going to continue to harm people and communities.
So that's the reform versus structural change argument right there, right? I mean, it is one
No,
thing.
I don't think so. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I wouldn't call them versus. I think it's reform and structural change.
Right. Okay. But that, I mean, the point being that it doesn't matter how good these
Right.
cops are.
Right.
We have a structural problem.
It doesn't matter how
with
compassionate they are, how conscientious they are, how committed to respecting constitutional rights they are. They're working in a system that hurts people because of the way it is constructed in ways that cops have very little control over.
And so let's go into that concept of like what, presuming that we can do all the reforms that we need to, you know, and it does sound like, I mean, there is a shocking, and again, you've said that the police academy in DC anyways in 2016 has, you know, changed, but it does sound like there's like a shocking absence of sort of like the type of training that you would think that somebody would need to be interacting with the community.
Yes.
But even, and maybe you can speak to that for a moment as to what could that could be. But then I want to talk about the other side of the ledger, which is like from a structural standpoint, if you get that super, you know, sensitive cop who is aware of like, I'm able to, you know, put danger into perspective. I mean, I just don't know if there's like 800,000 people in the country who are ever going to get to that point, frankly. But what would be some of the key reforms? But then let's talk about the structure stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so, okay, we could go on for quite a long time, so I'll try to be really brief here. We can start with recruiting. Most cops in most places are whiter than their surrounding communities. That's actually not the case in DC, but it is in most major cities. They tilt very heavily male. Only about 12.5% of all law enforcement officers nationwide are female. There's pretty compelling evidence that women do police differently and better in many ways than men do. Many departments recruit. This is something we have our students do. We have them look for YouTube videos that departments use to recruit. And it's astonishing how many police departments think a great recruiting video shows people, you know, smashing down doors and tackling fleeing suspects. And guess what kind of recruits that's going to attract? You know, exactly the wrong kind. So all sorts of things about recruiting, you know, where the investments in recruiting are, who is recruited should change. Training, absolutely, that there should be much more in-depth training about the neighborhoods and communities people are operating in, about the ways in which structural racism has distorted our system, about what we know and don't know, and mostly it's don't know, about what causes crime and what types of policing might improve things or make communities better off. And as I said, the answer to that is mostly we don't actually know. And cops should know that, right? That's actually something that they should be thinking about. Et cetera, et cetera. So lots of things about training. The way shifts are structured, it varies tremendously from place to place, but in DC, the way shifts are structured, there's never any sort of built-in reflection period of like, well, how did that call go? Could we have done that differently? You know, what do we learn from this? Doesn't really happen. The way people are evaluated, you get a medal if you do CPR and save somebody's life, but it's the sort of dog that doesn't bark in the night problem. Nobody gets medals for having de-escalated a situation, you know, and kept something from getting out of hand. So how we think about figuring out how to recognize those things. So all of those kinds of things, I think, are really important in terms of the tweaks cops can make to policing. But yes, they don't come close to getting at any of the big, broad structural problems.
And one thing I did find fascinating is when you talked about the both white and black cops would look
Mhm.
at, and you were in a 7D, which is a like a heavily policed
Yeah,
district, I guess,
yeah,
um, that they perceived the the people living in this district as animals, and the idea that they had no, and they blamed them for their situation, and the idea that they had no sort of like a historical context
yeah,
in which these things here, I mean, it is a you know, I have conversations on this program with, like, libertarians or whatnot who have the
right.
exact same sort of no concept of like, well, yes, I mean, we're not all similarly situated. I found that fascinating, but I know you have a limited time, so let's talk about the structural things. Let's talk about like that concept of defund the police. I don't think you would subscribe to the idea that we should have no police, but it certainly sounds like you would like to make their portfolio much, much narrower.
Yeah, and I don't think that was a great slogan, defund the police. I think that the slogan people sort of moved towards, a kind of reinventing public safety, reimagining public safety, is the right idea. And that's partly because I don't think this should be about budgets. It should be about strategy. That we can't fix policing just by taking money away. Then we'll just have fewer police doing the same crappy things. And it won't magically give us, a core of social workers who are empowered and skilled to respond in effective ways or anything like that. But I think the conversation we should be having is, where do we want to be in 10 years and 15 years and 20 years? How far away from that are we right now? What will it take in terms of investments, in terms of training, in terms of recruiting, to begin to get us where we want to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And let's start that process right now. All that being said, and I do think absolutely there are lots of things cops do that you don't need an armed officer to do. It's crazy to have armed officers do. Most societies don't have armed officers doing. We have armed officers enforcing civil traffic regulation violations. We don't have armed officers who, come to your door if you miss an IRS deadline. Why do we think they need to come with a gun if you made a right turn on red when the sign said you shouldn't? It's nuts. But I should say, we can do all of those things and it still won't affect the deeper issues. And you alluded to them a minute ago, Sam. Why do we have high crime in this particular neighborhood? Well, you actually have to start thinking about the restrictive covenants that forced African Americans into that community and out of other communities. You have to think about the preferential tax benefits that led supermarket chains to locate in wealthier communities and not in poorer communities. The decisions about bus lines and subway lines and public transportation that have left many poor communities far away from the places where the jobs are, with no easy access to them if you don't have a car, and so on and so forth. That the reinventing public safety, unless as a society we start getting serious about the ways in which both racism and other forms of economic inequality have created areas where there is a lot more crime, we're still not going to solve any problems. And that's a multi-generational challenge, not one that we're going to solve in even the next 20 years.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.